His eyes went fuzzy for a second, but he didn't even have time to grab a breath. When he glanced up, thousands of ice arrows were zinging past him, all aimed straight at him, courtesy of the Frost Monarch. Jin-Woo jumped to his feet, holding his breath tightly as he knocked away the icy projectiles raining down on him. He moved so fast he was like a blur. But how long could he keep this up with our attacks closing in from all sides? The Frost Monarch sneered, still firing off arrows, waiting for Jin-Woo to slow down even a little. Then, shunk. The Frost Monarch froze, staring in shock at the dagger now stuck in his chest. His hand was stained with his own blood. When he looked up, the bold human was staring right at him. Jin-Woo had just thrown one of his daggers while blocking arrows. The Frost Monarch's anger flared up. "How dare you harm me?" he shouted. With a swift move, Jin-Woo pulled his dagger back from the monarch's chest. It had struck his heart. What would have been a death blow to anyone else didn't even faze Jin-Woo. At least the hail of arrows had finally stopped. He tightened his grip on Kamish's wrath and snarled, "You're not walking out of here alive." The Frost Monarch roared in fury, controlling its army of golems. The Plague Monarch sent its twisted, spider-like humans scuttling forward. And the Fang Monarch, its arm fully healed, now pulled a sword from another pocket dimension and charged at Jin-Woo. He tracked their every move as they closed in from all sides. He held two Kamish's wrath daggers tightly in his hands, breathing deeply. Suddenly, a sharp crick sound came from behind him. A voice he loved shouted excitedly, "My king." He spun around, eager to see who it was. Just moments before, this trusted ally of Jin-Woo felt completely useless, trapped in the Frost Monarch's icy prison. Was he really this powerless? What was the point of all his leveling up? It was tearing Baru apart to watch his king get surrounded by enemies right in front of him. But there was nothing he could do. The Frost Monarch's magic was on a whole different level, and Baru had no way to fight back. He could only hope and pray that his king would escape safely. Luckily, Jin-Woo was holding his own against these mysterious enemies. "My king is as incredible as I always knew he'd be." Baru felt himself amazed once again by his master's skill. Watching Jin-Woo fight so bravely brought tears to Baru's eyes. But being outnumbered was starting to take its toll on Jin-Woo, and the pressure was mounting fast. Baru fought hard to get free, but he could see the enemy closing in on Jin-Woo. "No, not my king." His heart raced as the Plague Monarch slammed Jin-Woo into a building. That's when something inside Baru just snapped. Snap. Baru lost his mind. Baru flipped into action mode. His mind a blank as instinct took over. He had one goal, protect his king. With a deafening roar of scry, Baru's face twisted with rage. Every muscle in his body flexed at once. Arms, legs, everything pushing against the solid block of ice trapping him. The ice creaked and groaned. Crick. Crick. Fine cracks spider-webbed across its surface. Baru flailed wildly with every part of his body. Carry. The ice couldn't take how crazy the angry ant soldier was acting, so it started to crack. His mind raced with one thought: save the king. Scrota. Using every ounce of strength, he smashed through the ice. Karakum. Karib tore open a hole with his bare hands, and rushed straight to Jin-Woo. "My king," Baru shouted as he rushed toward his master. But Baru didn't have time to celebrate their reunion. He quickly noticed the scrapes and cuts on Jin-Woo from when the insect woman slammed him into the building earlier. How could she dare touch his king? Fury burned inside Baru, and with a fierce cry of Skristalabal, as she shot off toward the Queen of Insects. The Frost Monarch was stunned as Baru's loud roar echoed through downtown Seoul. "A mere shadow soldier broke free of my binding spell," the Frost Monarch exclaimed in disbelief. That should have been impossible. He checked Baru's power level, and let out a shocked gasp. It wasn't just any ordinary shadow soldier, this was something much bigger. How did that human create a marshal? He shouted, stunned. Marshals were powerful beings tied to the Shadow Monarch, each one a force of destruction. While the Frost Monarch was stunned by this news, the Queen of Insects stepped forward. "This rude child doesn't even know who his own mother is," she said with a smirk. Skrava, the Plague Monarch, who ruled over all the bugs in the world of chaos, let out a loud screech. "You dare talk to me like that?" she shouted furiously at the Ant King. Baru didn't back down. With a swift move, he dodged her attack and unleashed a powerful roar filled with magic. The sound blasted right at her midsection, where bugs were swarming all over. Grava. The Ant King's roar was so strong that it tore through the mass of bugs, revealing the Plague Monarch's true form for just a moment, rotting flesh and hollow eye sockets crawling with maggots. The Plague Monarch was furious when the Ant King dared to disobey his master. Ah! The Queen of Insects unleashed a deafening roar that sent Baru flying backward. He skidded across the ground before finally regaining his balance, breathing heavily and shaking his head to clear it. Scree. Ga. Ugh. The Queen of Insects then summoned the swirling cloud of insects to reform her massive body. Jin-Woo watched the battle unfold, nodding in understanding. The enemies were super tough, and Baru wouldn't survive for much longer, but he knew he could distract at least one enemy, giving Jin-Woo a chance to act. All the other monarchs were glued to the battle too, their worry growing by the second. He could tell they were getting nervous. Baru couldn't hold them off forever, so Jin-Woo made his move. With a burst of speed that no one saw coming, he sprinted straight for the Frost Monarch. Zoo, boom, the ground cracked under each step, as he charged forward with all his might. The Frost Monarch summoned a shimmering ice spear. His eyes locked on Jin-Woo as he charged toward him. But just as Jin-Woo was about to strike, he suddenly swerved and launched himself at the Fang Monarch instead. The Fang Monarch, who had been waiting for the perfect moment to counterattack when Jin-Woo went after the Frost Monarch, was caught completely off guard by this unexpected move. He just managed to block Jin-Woo's dagger, his quick instincts kicking in at the last second. Jin-Woo let out a disappointed hiss. Pass. He'd been hoping to catch the Fang Monarch off guard and land a finishing blow with his sneak attack, but the Fang Monarch was faster than he expected. On the bright side, he'd still managed to startle him. Let's keep the pressure on. Jin-Woo flipped Kamish's wrath around and went on the offensive, striking again and again without giving up. The sharp blade sliced through the air, with loud hunklang noises, cutting everything in their path. The King of Beasts snarled and stumbled back, struggling to keep up. Jin-Woo suddenly felt danger behind him. He twisted his body fast, barely escaping the Frost Monarch's shimmering ice spear, as it zipped past his side way too close for comfort. It was 2 against 1 now. Jin-Woo locked eyes with the Frost Monarch for just a moment, and sensed a surge of anger from him. Clenching his teeth tightly, Jin-Woo swung his dagger at the ice spear. The force of the strike sent the Frost Monarch stumbling backward, clutching his chest. Jin-Woo didn't waste any time. Chin crus. Jin was slashed at the monarch's face, aiming for those arrogant eyes, but the monarch jerked his head away just in time. Jin-Woo barely managed to leave a shallow cut on his cheeks. So close. Chin anticipating an attack from the King of Beasts next. Jin-Woo spun around quickly. Chugong. It was a narrow escape, and before he could even catch his breath, he had to be ready for whatever came next. The Frost Monarch held his spear tightly, and plunged back into battle. In front of him loomed the towering Frost Monarch, its icy breath visible in the air. Behind him, the Fang Monarch snarled, baring razor-sharp teeth. Both monsters attacked without pause, their relentless swings creating a symphony of clangs. Clang, 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 clang. Jin-Woo's weapon, Kamish's wrath, darted through the air like lightning, blocking each strike with precision. The battle was a blur as Jin-Woo and the monarchs moved so swiftly that all onlookers could see were trails of motion, their forms mere after images in the chaos. Jin-Woo couldn't see the monarch's moves with his own eyes, but he didn't need to. With his sharp senses he could tell everything they were doing. He could sense their line of sight, how they breathed, how their muscles tensed, and even the way their magic pulsed. There wasn't a single detail that escaped him. I can see it all, Jin-Woo thought to himself. If he moved just a little faster he knew he could outsmart his enemies. The monarchs were stunned as Jin-Woo kept getting faster and faster. They couldn't believe their eyes. How was this possible? He shouldn't be able to tap into the full power of the Shadow Monarch yet. But here he was, pushing past what should be possible. It was like watching someone rewrite the rules right in front of them. The two monarchs exchanged nervous glances, memories flashing back to the terrifying tales of one of the most fearsome kings in the world of chaos. Before they could even process what was happening, Jin-Woo crossed his daggers, and blocked their weapons with a loud hap-bam. The force sent both monarchs flying backward. Their faces were pure shock. Leonard, watching closely, knew he was the only one who could keep up with the fight. Thomas, on the other hand, was out of commission, surrounded by healers who were desperately patching up his serious injuries. but everything seemed blurry to him. His eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at what was happening. Jin-Woo faced off against beasts that could take down top-tier tanks and monsters that could freeze an entire area with a single frosty breath. But he stood his ground, not backing down. Suddenly, Hunter Sung darted forward at an incredible speed so fast, you could barely see him. The air erupted in a chaos of sound like a tornado tearing through the area with deafening explosions. Thomas's eyes widened as he stumbled back. What's happening? He shouted over the roar. Leonard didn't blink. His gaze locked on Jin-Woo. His mouth hung open in disbelief. What the? He muttered, his voice trailing off like he couldn't even finish the thought. Thomas shook his head, trying to process what he was seeing. Is this it? He thought. Is this what it looks like when powerful beings clash in an epic battle? Leonard's face was pale. He rubbed his head, looking dazed. It feels like we're watching the end of the world, he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the chaos around them. The only good news was that at least one fighter was still on their team. Scralla. Jin-Woo spun around as Baru let out a terrifying scream. The Queen of Insects had him pinned under her foot, and no matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't break free. Jin-Woo's eyes widened in horror as he felt Baru's magic fading away. The ant soldier's life slipping out of existence. Is this how they got rid of the soldier attached to Thomas? Jin-Woo pushed that thought aside for now. He first had to deal with the two remaining monarchs charging toward him. Then he tried to call Baru back into his shadow, but the system's response was immediate. You cannot call back the designated target. The same message flashed again, like it was mocking him. You cannot call back the designated target. Jin-Woo's face darkened with frustration. Jin-Woo couldn't let Baru go down like this. She was his top soldier, the strongest weapon he had. If he lost her, everything would fall apart. The queen was so focused on banishing the shadow soldier that she didn't even notice Jin-Woo coming for her. Human. Jin-Woo let out a roar filled with magic energy, just like Baru had done earlier. Rosala. The queen's bugs scattered as his voice echoed through the air. For a moment she looked genuinely shocked. The plague monarch zinged a blob of green goo straight at Jin-Woo's face. No problem. Jin-Woo was ready. With a flick of his hand, Ruler's authority blocked the attack like it was nothing. But there was still some toxic stuff lingering in the air. Skill alert. Deadly poison detected nearby. RPG buff activated. Detoxing. 3-2-1. Done. The poison was gone, and Jin-Woo wasn't in any danger. In fact, the plague monarch was now right where he wanted her, close enough to strike. Jin-Woo's eyes sparkled with determination. Earlier the frost monarch had survived a stab to the heart, so it was probably the same for the plague monarch. Jin-Woo knew he'd have to keep striking until he found her weak spot. He tightened his grip on his daggers and unleashed a flurry of attacks. Mutilation. The blades moved so fast they sounded like a Gatling gun. Shinch, 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 shinch. Woo's daggers tore into the plague queen's body, leaving holes everywhere and ripping her apart. Shinch, shinch, shint. Contained, but it didn't matter. The maggots inside her squirmed together and quickly healed her injuries. Regeneration. No problem. If the queen could heal herself, Jin-Woo just needed to keep attacking faster than she could recover. He stayed right on her heels, hitting her with mutilation over and over again. Slash, 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 Tubale, AHH. Jin-Woo kept using mutilation relentlessly until the Queen of Insects was completely stripped of all her strength. Finally, you have defeated one of the 9 monarchs, Quersha the Plague Monarch. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. You have. Bunch of messages popped up, and Jin-Woo couldn't help but feel excited. But he didn't have time to celebrate. There were still 2 more enemies out there who wanted him dead. Jin-Woo spun around quickly to block the deadly energy heading his way, but this time his enemies were a step ahead. While he was distracted by the Plague Monarch, one of them grabbed him with an outstretched hand. Jin-Woo felt 5 gusts of wind brush against his back. Chunk. Tron 5 super sharp claws burst through Jin-Woo's chest. The Fang Monarch had fully transformed into a massive werewolf, and slammed its claws deep into Jin-Woo's back, hitting vital spots. Jin-Woo's body froze. A clink. Acclamish's wrath slipped from his grasp, clattering to the ground. Before him stood the Frost Monarch, who crafted an icy dagger in his palm. "This is the end," he said coldly, plunging the frosted blade into Jin-Woo's stomach, with a sickening shunk. At Baru, now awake, let out a blood-curdling scream. "My king," she cried. Jin-Woo shook his head weakly, but Baru ignored him. She struggled to her feet, her legs trembling like newborn fawns, and began to limp toward the Frost Monarch. Her claws gleamed in the dim light, as she unleashed a piercing wail. Scree. The hunter really didn't want Baru to get sent back to the void by the monarchs. When the Ant King realized what Jin-Woo was about to do, he shook his head sadly, tears in his eyes. Even though the Ant King tried to stop him, Jin-Woo pushed Baru back into his shadow. The ancient ice elf grinned, thinking victory was his for sure. "Is that all you've got, human?" He leaned in close to Jin-Woo's ear, and whispered, "If that's it, then I guess you won't be around when our armies take over this world." The Frost Monarch stepped back with a sly grin. "But your homeland will face something even worse," he sneered. "Just because you're from there, I'll make everyone in your country suffer terribly. They'll be forced to exist forever in a state between life and death." The freezing cold from the dagger stuck in Jin-Woo's stomach spread through his body, turning him into ice. Even as frost covered his face, Jin-Woo's eyes burned with fury. The Frost Monarch laughed at him. "Keep hating me even after you're dead. It'll give me even more joy." The Snow King pulled the dagger out of Jin-Woo's stomach and plunged it into his heart. The dagger glowed with an icy light as it pierced through Jin-Woo's ribs and plunged straight into his heart. Once the Frost Monarch was certain, he destroyed the hunter's heart. He yanked out the blade. Jin-Woo collapsed to the ground, banging his head on the pavement. He felt dizzy, like the world was spinning around him, but he could still sense his enemies slipping away into the distance. "Crow, no! I can still." I tried to move, to even twitch a finger, but his body wouldn't budge. He lost control fast. Everything went dark, and he felt himself floating in total blackness. His heart stopped beating, and suddenly, messages started popping up one after another. "Your HP has dropped to 0. You have died. You possess the Black Heart. All requirements for passive skill, unknown, have been met. Passive skill, unknown, is now active." Then, without warning, a window explaining the skill appeared on its own. As Jin-Woo's eyes fluttered open, a voice he knew well spoke up. The ceiling above was a stark white, and the sharp smell of disinfectant filled his nose. He was lying on a bed so hard it felt like solid ground. His passive skills had been updated. Passive skill unknown at max level, willpower at level 1, dagger mastery also maxed out. Evolution at max level 2. Then he heard the familiar voice again asking, "Are you awake?" Jin-Woo's eyes snapped open. He knew exactly where he was in the hospital. But how? He could have sworn a cold dagger had stabbed him right through the heart. Yet, here he was, alive. He sat up slowly, and that's when he saw them. Two people who looked super worried, like they'd been waiting forever for him to wake up. Jin-Woo recognized one of them immediately. President Wu. Wait a minute. The monarchs, or, should I say those monsters, what even happened to them? And how am I still alive? Jin-Chul glanced at the guy from the surveillance team, both of them looking totally shocked. He took off his sunglasses and leaned in closer to the bed, his teammate standing right behind him. "Okay. There are 3 things you need to know," he said, lowering his voice like he was about to spill a big secret. "I'm the leader of the surveillance team," Jin-Chul said with a serious look. "And I was really hoping you could explain something to me, Hunter Sung." He glanced at Jin-Woo sternly. "Wait, how do you even know who I am? Have we met before?" Jin-Woo looked confused. "Hey, hold on. What are you talking about with these moving stone statues?" he asked. "We got reports from survivors," Jin-Chul explained. "So the surveillance team brought some members from the White Tiger Guild to check it out. But when they got there, everything was no. That's not what I meant." Jin-Woo interrupted, shaking his head like this whole situation was crazy. He felt like something strange was going on, that he couldn't explain. Could it really be? Jin-Woo glanced up at the ceiling, and suddenly everything clicked into place. This was definitely the same room. After barely surviving that terrifying double dungeon, Jin-Woo had spent 2 whole weeks recovering in this fancy VIP hospital room. Courtesy of the Hunters Association, it all came rushing back, how he'd felt like he was on death's doorstep, and yet somehow made it through. Now being here again brought back a flood of memories he hadn't expected to revisit. Now Jin-Woo found himself back in that same exact room. And based on what Jinchul had just said, it wasn't just the room that felt like a major throwback. How is this even possible? Well, Jin-Woo sat there speechless, his mind racing. Jinchul's voice broke through the silence, tinged with worry. Hey, are you okay? Jin-Woo kept his head down, pinching his temples as they throbbed like a drum. He motioned vaguely for Jinchul to back off. I think I need a minute to wrap my head around this, he said quietly. Hey, why not finish checking out my magic powers? Jinhwa asked, sounding a bit annoyed. How did this E-rank hunter know? He might have been reawakened. Jinchul gave Jinhwa a sharp look, then shook his head and got back to business. First we need to hear what happened in there. Jinchul said. Did you see anything before you passed out? I already told you. I don't remember anything. Jinhwa replied, clearly frustrated. Had Jinchul already questioned him before? Jinchul scratched his head, confused. He was certain he'd never met Jin-Woo before. As a member of the surveillance team, he made it a point to remember every hunter he encountered. But Jin-Woo sung. No memory of him at all. Jinchul figured something really bad must have happened to make Jin-Woo forget so much. Alright, let's get this over with, Jinchul said, waving a hand impatiently. A team member stepped forward, holding a small device that glowed faintly, a mana meter. Jin-Woo smirked as he watched everything unfold. Exactly like he'd expected. All you need to do is touch this essence stone, Jinchul instructed. Got it, Jin-Woo replied, placing his hand on the stone without hesitation. The process was quick, thanks to Jin-Woo's cooperation, but when Jinchul saw the results, his eyebrows furrowed in concern. He messed around with the gadget a couple of times before turning to his assistant. Why isn't this thing working? Didn't I say to test it before we left? He asked. Sir. His assistant looked nervous, and rushed to check the manometer, but couldn't get it to work. It had been fine until Jin-Woo touched it a few minutes ago. Weird. Jinchul sighed, and apologized to Jin-Woo. Oops, seems like we made a little slip-up. We're on the hunt for a new one right away. It's all part of figuring out what went wrong. Jin-Woo quickly nodded, not giving Jinchul a chance to say more. The staff from the association scrambled out of there. But then something caught Jinchul's attention, making him stop and come back. What was going on with Jinchul? This wasn't matching up with what he remembered. Jin-Woo looked up curiously as the director of the surveillance team leaned in closer. Hey, you know what happens to fake high rankers, right? I'd silence. I've seen a lot of high-level hunters, the director said, but none with eyes like yours.